Wonderful. Why don't we begin at least? Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have around 100 participants with us tonight, over 300 people registered. I'm Raina Weinstein. I'm the Assistant Director of Tikvah Online Academy. And it's my distinct honor to really welcome you all here and to listen to this conversation from two extraordinary Jewish educators, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb and Rabbi David Wolpe, on the topic of post-bar mitzvah Jewish education, something that is too often ignored. Shortly, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb, to say a few more words about Rabbi Wolpe. But before we do that, I want to say a few more words about tonight's program. And both Rabbi Wolpe and Rabbi Gottlieb, tonight, as I said before, we'll hear a fantastic conversation from Rabbi Gottlieb and Rabbi Wolpe. And then Rabbi Gottlieb will share a little bit more about Tikvah Online Academy and Tikvah's programming and how they relate specifically to this question tonight. Rabbi David Wolpe is the senior rabbi at Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, but I would be remiss if I did not mention my personal connection to Rabbi Wolpe on tonight's topic. Rabbi Wolpe was actually my aunt's bat mitzvah tutor at Har Zion back in the 80s. So we'll have to check in about her post bat mitzvah Jewish education went later tonight. But
Rabbi Wolpe, that's dating you a little bit.
Oh yeah,
mid 80s in Philadelphia, going way back.
Right,
yes.
And I was in my 60s then. I shouldn't mention.
Well, your father actually officiated my parents' wedding, so and I'd also I'm also very honored to introduce my colleague, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb, who is the Senior Director of the Tikvah Fund and the Dean of Tikvah Online Academy. Few people have spent as much time thinking about tonight's topic as Rabbi Gottlieb. He came to the Tikvah Fund after a distinguished career at some of the leading Jewish day schools in the country, and has spent over a decade really building supplemental Jewish education programs for students both in Jewish day schools and secular Jewish, non-Jewish public and private schools. And he really has thought so deeply about the formation of young people. He doesn't see them as teens, but he really sees them as young people. So I want to turn it over to Rabbi Gottlieb, and thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Raina, for the very generous introduction. And my personal history with Rabbi Wolpe doesn't date back to the 80s, but I do want to say that when I was a young rabbi, not to say that I'm not young anymore, although, you know, you could be the judge for yourself. I used to see this brief column in the New York Jewish Week, this pithy yet very wise and almost wizened weekly column that was penned by none other than Rabbi David Wolpe. And since then, I've actually become a colleague and friend of Rabbi Wolpe's, and it's an incredible thing to see this public intellectual, this Jewish public intellectual, who is named the rabbi's rabbi, the America's rabbi, top rabbi by reputable institutions and magazines, yet still have an incredible ability to see the human scale, the truly real, and to go beyond the sensational headlines, and to really on a human scale engage the congregant, engage the student in profound and deep and rich ways. And I've been incredibly blessed to watch Rabbi Wolpe in action, teaching through his many courses as a faculty member of Tikvah Online Academy, as well as being a member of the Maimonides Scholars Program. So it's a very special honor for me to share this stage, this virtual stage, with Rabbi Wolpe. And a final word before I let Rabbi Wolpe share his Torah, his wisdom, his insight with us on this critical question of educating young Jews beyond bar and bat mitzvah. But I thought it was very auspicious, Rabbi Wolpe. Today I was driving home from work, and I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and the guest was David Brooks, a friend of yours, and he actually quoted Rabbi David Wolpe. And here I'm driving to have a conversation with Rabbi David Wolpe, and on my podcast player is Rabbi Wolpe talking about the difference between being religious and being spiritual, and how that counterintuitively somehow we think that spirituality is something more precious than religion, but really it can be quite the opposite in terms of real tangible results. And I think that to me framed in many ways the question of Jewish education beyond the bar and bat mitzvah years. So without further ado, I'd love to turn the program over to you, Rabbi Wolpe, and hear you on this question of how to educate young Jews beyond bar and bat mitzvah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And it's been wonderful to be involved with Tikvah and to be involved with Rabbi Gottlieb and the entire organization, which does wonderful work. And I thought before I would talk about how to do it, I want to say a couple words about why to do it. The usual response that I've heard rabbis give, which is a good one, I'm certainly not denigrating the idea, is they say, look, you wouldn't stop your historical education or your mathematical education or any other education at 13 and expect to have any level of competence as an adult. And too many American Jews have a 13-year-old idea of Judaism. And that's true, and it's a problem, but I want to elaborate a little bit on why it's a problem. And I don't mean just it's a problem for Jewish continuity, which we all understand, that it's a problem for raising Jewish children, which we all understand. I want to talk about what you're missing, because I have the privilege, of course, of seeing and educating Jews at different ages. And there's so much you can't tell 12 and 13-year-olds with any effectiveness. A lot of Judaism is about things that are deep and complicated: politics, sexuality, relationships, grappling with yourself. The whole idea of tshuva, of repentance. Think how different that is at 13 from what it is at 40. It's a completely different idea and different experience. And you can't understand what our sages have said about tshuva if you've never lived a life. And the reality of history doesn't come home to you when you're 12 or 13. It sometimes doesn't even come home to you later on. I as an example, this last, I guess it's 2 weeks ago, I know someone who's very young, maybe in her early 20s, who was a big fan of Cuomo's. Now, it doesn't matter what you think of Cuomo, pro or con, that's not the point of the story. Here's the point of the story. She said to me, "This is worse than Watergate." And I remember thinking, if you were old enough to remember Watergate, to remember that the entire world was watching this drama unfold over months, that the president of the United States resigned in disgrace, you would understand the vast gulf between the two. But my saying that won't give you the knowledge that you don't have yet. And so much of what it is that we want to transmit to people who are younger requires that they be in an ongoing dialogue with a tradition that will grow with them. You know, the Greeks used to say about Plato that whatever road of life you walked down, you found him on the way back. And that's what's true of the Torah. Whatever road of life you walk down, you find it on the way back, but only if you're there to meet it. The Torah can have lots and lots of wisdom. If you never open it, it's irrelevant to your life. And so to stop at 13 is in some ways to miss the best part of the tradition and the most rich and deep and intricate and ongoing. So that's why I wanted to say that I'll give you one more example. I wrote down one example when I was thinking about this that has to do, it's also about being parochial. You know, we all want our kids to travel. Why? Because we don't want them to be parochial in space. We want them to realize there are other places than the United States, other cultures, other ideas, other languages. But too often we make them parochial in time. We don't teach them about other ages and the experience of other ages. And if we want to make them time travelers, so to speak, you do that through the tradition. And so I remember when I was putting together a book on David, on King David, when I was writing a book on King David, I looked at all these paintings and images and so on. And there's one painting of Bathsheba by Rembrandt. And if you remember the story very quickly, David spots her. He sees her on a roof. He wants to sleep with her. And he ends up in the end contracting the murder of her husband so that her husband won't find out that he impregnates her. And Rembrandt catches the moment when she receives the note from the king that he wants her. And the sadness in her face because of the tragedy and the epical reverberations of that moment is something that no one who hasn't lived could begin to understand. And you understand that like a Rembrandt can express all that emotion because he lived a life. And we want our children to see images like that and understand and not feel this doesn't speak to me because they don't know the story and they haven't filtered their own experience through the characters and wisdom of the Torah. And so it's really important that this be not just beyond bar mitzvah, but a lifelong process, because without it, you miss the tremendous richness of life that Torah brings to it. And so when you complete a bar mitzvah, the problem psychologically is that people see it as a goal. And goals are both wonderful and terrible. How many times have I heard people say to college students, this isn't real life? And that is a bad and wrong and inaccurate thing to say. Every day of life is equally real. And if you suggest that some things only begin after you're done with this, you're doing a disservice. So I don't want to make the child think, with 13, I'm done. With high school, I'm done. When you're done with high school, what is it? Oh, when I get college, then I really begin to live. When you get out of college, when I get a job, I really begin to live. And then you think, when I get married, I really begin to live. When I have a child, I really begin to live. There's always a goal at which you think this all starts. But it never starts and never stops. It's always, as long as you are alive, part of the continuing drama and journey of growth. And so bar mitzvah is a mark, it's a station along the way, but it's not the goal. And therefore, when a child finishes bar mitzvah, the question is, how do you continue the journey? And I'm going to make several suggestions because so much is dependent, obviously, on your child's circumstances, what's possible. But I'm going to say a couple of words in favor of each, okay? Let me start with day school. We used to call them parochial schools. But in my experience, the people who come out of day schools are anything but parochial. I went to Akiba Hebrew Academy in Philadelphia. So did Mitch Albom and Jake Tapper, neither of whom distinguished themselves for being parochial when they went out into the world. Because you understand that if you have deep roots, you speak from a firm place. I speak in churches all the time. The only reason they invite me to church is not because I'm David Wolpe, but because I'm Rabbi Wolpe, because they assume that I'm deeply rooted in something, and so I have something to say. It's like Cynthia Ozik's fantastic image of the shofar. We're coming up on Rosh Hashanah, so a shofar image, we blew it this morning in Minyan for Elul. It's a good image. She said, if you start off by blowing in the broad end, you get nothing. But if you start off by blowing in the narrow end, you get a sound everyone can hear. So if you send a kid to day school, I have never found kids in day school people always say they should meet different sorts of people and relate to. I've never found day school kids unable to relate to other people in the world. Lehefech, quite the opposite. I find that they know who they are and they can relate to other people very well. So that's one, is I'm very pro day school. And if you can, I think that it's a wonderful thing. Now, obviously every kid has to fit, but I obviously afternoon school is also can be very productive and good, but it's difficult because it's difficult to take your kids after the normal day and put them in another school. You start off already with a strike against you, but it's certainly better than not having a Jewish education. I'm a big advocate of Jewish camps. I cannot tell you how much I think it's important to send your kid to Jewish camps. And having gone both as a camper and as a counselor, I will tell you that the ideal age, you should forgive me because this isn't exactly post bar mitzvah, the ideal age to send your kid to a Jewish camp is like 17, 18. Because you want to send your kid to a Jewish camp when they really start to date. That's when it really matters. You know how many people meet their spouses at summer camps? And do you know the kind of relationships that people forge at summer camps?
I did.
And I will tell you a secret. There you go. And I will tell you a secret about myself. Honestly, I'm a rabbi because of Ramah, not because my father was a rabbi. Because Ramah was the first place that I got to stand up in front of people as a counselor and then as a division head and be a rabbi. And I didn't know that I liked it until I had the chance to do it. So Jewish summer camps are a really powerful. Now, I mean, I grew up in Ramah, and Ramah is the only one I really know well, but there are lots and lots of different kinds of Jewish summer camps. And I can't recommend them highly enough. It's great for the counselors. It's great for the kids. Also, it's the only place where you can live Judaism 24 hours a day. And that's a really powerful thing, is this can actually be an entire life experience, because obviously if you live in this world, we don't live in a Jewish world, but in summer camp, you can live that. And it has a anyway, okay, so you got that idea. A little bit of special pleading. Synagogues. Synagogues are really wonderful institutions. Don't be afraid to take your kid to the synagogue after they finish their bar bat mitzvah. Different synagogues obviously have different strengths and weaknesses. Find a synagogue that speaks to them. Find a youth group that speaks to them. Anything you can do to hook kids in can be powerful and important, especially when they do it with their peers. And that's why everything that I've been naming so far are things that you do with peers. School, camp, youth groups, Tikvah, okay? I certainly want to put in a plug for Tikvah. Tikvah does amazing education with high school and college students. And like with summer camps, they meet great role models. One of the wonderful things about a summer camp or a Tikvah program is you think to yourself, oh, I thought all the people who were Jewish and adult were kind of like nerdy and not like me. And then you go to camp or you take a Tikvah class and you discover, oh my God, these people they just know much more about Judaism. And the ability to identify is a really powerful thing. As you know, modeling is really powerful at any age, but especially when you're young, which is why I'll make my last suggestion and then we'll go to conversations with Rabbi Gal, which is, let's say you can't go to day school, you can't do afternoon school. Let's say you live in a place where it's not available and you don't have a synagogue that you like or can relate to, and Jewish summer camp is impossible for whatever reason. It still can be incredibly powerful and important to find a teacher or a tutor and bring that person in for an hour or 2 hours a week. I know a lot of Jews who were fired fired up, not fired from a job, but fired up, who were for a lifetime moved by one person, one teacher they encountered, a one-on-one experience that made all the difference for them. And I even know people who've tutored someone to teach their kids bar bat mitzvah, and the kid loves the tutor. And then when the bar bat mitzvah is over, that's it. They don't bring the tutor anymore. And I always think, well, why wouldn't you continue? You found a Jewish teacher that your kid loves. Keep learning. And then I said that was going to be the last thing, but I was wrong. Here's the last thing, which is, when I said keep learning, I thought of the fact that if you want your child to learn, the best thing to do is to learn. I know that growing up in a house surrounded by books and parents who were reading and studying all the time made me think, well, that's what people do. And that's just what I did, because of course, that's what I saw all around me. And so if you yourself aren't involved in some kind of Jewish learning, then I think it's great to do it together with your kids, or even just to have them see you do it, because nothing is more inspiring than actually realizing that adults do this. This isn't just something that kids do. Not, parents that drop their kids off at synagogue are sending them the wrong lesson, which is this is a place for kids, when in fact, as we know, it's a place for all people, all ages, and every age, both chronologically and historically. So,
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Rabbi Wolpe, for giving us lots to think about and lots, hopefully, to be able to engage with you. And let me remind our audience members that you have a great gift and opportunity to ask a question to Rabbi Wolpe. You can simply use the Q&A function on your Zoom to post questions, to give us some of your ideas and thinking and questions to address to Rabbi Wolpe. So please use that function, and we'll look forward to hearing your questions. So I just want to kick off with a couple of my own, and then we could get into a little dialogue and exchange, God willing, and then we can open up soon after to the audience. But one of the wisest Jewish educators that I had the great privilege of meeting was a man by the name of Professor Seymour Fox. And Professor Fox, you had a chance to meet him as well, I gather. Very, very wise. He was a student of Lee Shulman from the University of Chicago, really thoughtful educator, went on to be the president of the Mandel Foundation, commissioned this wonderful book by Cambridge University Press called Visions of Jewish Education. And basically his whole career in Jewish education was asking one simple question. It's a question that I want to pose now to you, Rabbi Wolpe. What should a Jew know? In other words, what are the areas, the specific disciplines, the specific skill set, the specific textual literacy, the specific canon of great Jewish texts that a Jew of any age, but certainly a Jew coming out of bar and bat mitzvah, what should he or she know to make him or her a literate, functioning Jew?
Apart from tax law, right?
You mean like tax law, to be a compliant United States citizen?
Right.
That goes without saying.
Oh, okay.
To be a Jew, not to be a human, not to be a mensch is one thing, and to be a mensch is another.
So as you well know, this is a question not with no answer, but with multiple answers. So I'm going to take my stab at it, but I confess that if you asked me a month from now or a month previously, you might get a slightly different response. Okay,
that's fair. That we won't hold it against.
Right. I would say at minimum, okay, the Jew has to have a basic familiarity with the central stories of the Torah. And that's not the same thing as knowing the Torah, because knowing the Torah is a huge undertaking. And we're talking about a Jew, but the central stories of the Torah should be familiar to you, and the central themes of the Torah should be. And by the Torah, I don't just mean the Chumash, I mean the Tanakh. You should know something about, the life of Samuel and David, and something about Kohelet and Job, and some Psalms, and I mean some basic Torah literacy. And then I think it's important to have a general sweep of Jewish history. That is, you should know about when the rabbis lived, what the medieval times were, and when the modern times were, because those are three very different periods, and something, of course, about the founding and the nature of the state of Israel. So the Torah, something about history, and then, of course, the fundamental behavior patterns and the meanings behind them of Jewish life. That is, you can't say I'm an educated Jew if you know nothing of Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Kashrut, the laws of keeping kosher, the laws of Shabbat. You have to know them all in detail, right? You don't have to know, like, if you have a big pot of meat, how much milk, if you drop it in, makes it invalid to eat, right? You don't have to know that. It's 1 in 60, by the way, but you don't have to know that, right? That's a little bit of a specialist thing. However, you should know about why milk and meat are separated, that, what animals are kosher and what definition there is of kosher. Those sorts of things, I think you can't call yourself a literate Jew without some sense of those. And then I would make a sort of special pleading, because this is this and Midrash are the field that I love most, for some fundamental concepts of Jewish philosophy. How Judaism thinks about God, how Judaism thinks about the afterlife, how Judaism thinks about the nature of human beings. A little bit, I think would be very important. We have, I know on this Zoom, I don't want to embarrass her or call it Kinney Zalesny. She and I have written an article, for example, about Buber in the modern age. I think to know something about different kinds of philosophies and philosophers would be good. And if this sounds like a lot, my answer is, it is a lot. It's a lot. That's why you can't do it by 13. That's why it requires a kind of lifelong learning. But the one thing that I will say to people to whom this seems overwhelming is, think about whatever it is you know well, any field that you know well, or if you don't know a field well, think about your family that you know well. We've learned in memory studies that contextual memory makes remembering things much easier. That is, you tell me something about your uncle, I won't remember it in a few weeks. But if someone in the family tells you something new about your uncle, you'll remember it. Why? Because you have a context to put it in. They did this study, by the way, something dear to my heart, because I used to be a tournament chess player. They did this with chess masters and the chessboard. They showed a chess position to chess masters and to the guy on the street. Sure enough, the chess masters remembered it much, much better. Then they took pieces and they randomly mixed them up in a position that could never happen in a chess game. And the chess masters remembered it almost no better than the guy in the street, because they didn't have context for it anymore. So the more you learn about Judaism, the easier it becomes to remember things, because it fits against the background. So if it seems daunting, that's only because you don't have enough context yet. But you can pick up general books like Joseph Telushkin's Jewish Literacy, or I'm a big fan, and not only because I wrote a preface to the new edition, but I also really like George Robinson's Essential Judaism. And you can read through those books just to get the background that allows you, and there are many others too, that allows you to move forward. And also you can use them as reference books. Oh, I forgot which Shmini Atzeret was. Let me take a look so that I can find it again. Of course, you can also use the internet, but a book is more helpful because if you read through it, it stays with you as opposed to just jumping around Google. That's what I would say. Those things strike me as the essentials that a Jew should know. And of course, there is, like all knowledge, no end to it.
So holding yourself to that high bar that you just articulated, I'm not looking for a scorecard per se, but I want you to be candid and sober and even hard-headed in the following assessment. How are we doing as a people, as a religion, as a community, in this space of the post-bar mitzvah, post-bat mitzvah arena, in that space of opportunity? How are we doing in our contemporary supplemental schools, Hebrew schools, congregational schools, synagogues? How are we doing in achieving that goal of the literate Jew as you've articulated?
I give you two different answers. For the ones that are in the schools, we're doing a B. In terms of getting people to do it, C-, D+. The problem is not, like, we have some wonderful day schools and some great camps and some terrific programs. The kids that come to Tikvah, we're doing really well with them. I mean, I know, and you know, these students who come out of the Tikvah program, like I loved that, and they want to learn, and they're like really enthused, but most kids don't come. So I would say the
We're going
ones
to change
we
that,
are-
Rabbi Wolpe.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here.
That's right. The ones that we're fortunate enough to be able to speak to, I think we have a real good shot. But I don't think, sadly, that we are, and in a way, what I would say is what we're failing with are the parents. Because it's the parents that don't send their kids to the schools and don't send their kids to the camps. And don't send their kids to the programs, whether youth groups or Tikvah or whatever. It's not so much the kids. So in that, we're doing pretty poorly.
A friend of mine recommended one of Philip Roth's early short stories, very comically subversive. It's collected in the anthology with Goodbye Columbus.
Goodbye Columbus.
It's called The Conversion of the Jews.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember, it's a story
Bia
about
Martin, Bia Martin. Yes, it's
Bia
one of the
Martin,
most
exactly.
brilliant
Bia Martin.
stories.
But it's like a caricature of what a Hebrew school, of
That's
what
right.
a congregational Hebrew school in the 50s and 60s. We're better than that.
Yeah.
But we still seem to be missing that, whether it's a kind of rigor or a seriousness or taking ourselves seriously to a certain extent and prioritizing it as a real threshold value. Something seems to be missing.
One of the saddest things I ever heard was after the beat poet Allen Ginsberg died. I heard somebody talking about his life, and they said he was a kid in Hebrew school in New York, and he made some outrageous comment or question, just like the kid does in that story, and they kicked him out of the school. They kicked him out of the school. He never went back. And I thought, we lost Allen Ginsberg. Like, how could you do that? He was Allen Ginsberg. He could have been,
we could have made a change in Allen Ginsberg.
That's right. He could have been Leonard Cohen instead of being Allen Ginsberg. In other words, he could have always felt close.
That's a madrega. That's a madrega. At least.
Yeah, that's a madrega. Exactly. So, yeah, I think that's exactly right. Which is, we're not, with afternoon school. I grant it's really hard to instill any kind of rigor. But yeah, we're fighting, and the battle is getting more difficult, as the parents know, because the proliferation of distractions is greater and greater and greater. It used to be you sent your kid to synagogue on Shabbos morning, or you sent them to soccer. Those were the two. But now there are a billion things the kid could be doing on Shabbos morning. And I don't know if you know this. I mean, I don't know who first said this, but let me just give you this wonderful parable about the rabbi who he said to the kid, "Where were you on Shabbos morning?" The kid said, "I was at soccer." He goes, "Soccer? What is this game, soccer? I've never heard of soccer." He says, "Oh, well, Rabbi, it's this game where you try to kick the ball into the net and the goalie tries to stop you from kicking the ball." And the rabbi goes, "Oh, the idea is to kick the ball into the net." He says, "Yes, so why not just get rid of the goalie? You can kick the ball right into the net." And the boy says, "Well, there's no value in it if it isn't difficult." And the rabbi goes, "Uh-huh." And that's what we face.
It's like the Magid, the Dubna Magid, making the bullseye
the circle, around the arrow.
By the arrow.
Yeah.
Look, I'm very grateful, Rabbi Wolpe, that you mentioned, the passion and the intensity and the seriousness of the Tikvah students. And, in a couple of minutes, we'll have an opportunity to share with our audience a little bit more about our vision for the Tikvah Online Academy for TOA. But I want to give you, before we get to that part and then the questions and answers from the audience, just what would be your recommendation if you were to recommend to a parent or a child, post bar and bat mitzvah, something to study, something to learn, to give them a kind of a taste of what's possible, a hook to keep them energized and going? What would that be in the world of Torah, in the world of Agadata and in Talmud and narrative and legend?
So first of all, before I do that, I didn't say, and I should have said, and people didn't mention it exactly on the chat, but their questions and answers remind me of the trips to Israel. I forgot Birthright, and other trips to Israel, the Ramah trip to Israel, summer camp trip to any trip to Israel is an unqualified good, right? And I'm so glad that I didn't leave. I would have been kicking myself the rest of the day that I didn't mention, my God, trips to Israel, obviously. And trips to Israel with your peers are, even better. Like I first went, with my father's synagogue trip. My brother and I were practically the only kids. But it was even better when I went later as a kid with other kids. So what would I suggest for them to read? Boy, I think that it in part depends on the kid. But some kids, if they're at a more sophisticated reading level, I've given some kids 14, 15 Heschel's Shabbat because it's very short and because it's really provocative and wonderful and interesting. And that's a good one. I still love, for me, I still think that Hirsch's 19 Letters is a really powerful book. And one of the good things about 19 Letters is it makes you realize that those arguments that you thought of, you didn't think of. You thought of them, but they were thought of and answered already 150 years ago. So I like that one a lot. But the truth is, I don't work with bar mitzvah age kids enough to know what literature has been written recently. There are novels that are wonderful to read. I'll tell you, some of you have read it. I've never given this novel to someone and had them say, I didn't like it, I couldn't get through it, ever, ever, ever. And that is Milton Steinberg's As a Driven Leaf. It's an extraordinary book, and it gives you more a sense of the world of the rabbis than any book I've ever read. And again, special pleading, to the Behrman House edition, I wrote a foreword. But that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because they knew how much I loved the book. That's why I wrote the foreword. It's really an extraordinary book. And the novels of Potok and the short stories of Singer, there's a lot of wonderful Jewish literature that can start you in an interest in the Jewish world, even though it's not specifically Torah. So anyway.
That's great. Well, Rabbi Wolpe, thank you for those, provocative and poignant observations and charges to us to think deeply about Jewish education. I'm going to ask you, if you would, to stick around a little bit. We're going to have some audience questions and answers very shortly, but I wanted to take this opportunity now to share with our audience a little bit more about what Tikvah Online Academy is, what it does, what our vision is, how we got to where we are today, and then you'll understand the import of this conversation with Rabbi Wolpe and what precisely we're trying to do in this field of Jewish education. So the Tikvah Fund, an institution of educational excellence and a think tank in its own right around Jewish political and Jewish intellectual issues, has been educating gifted high school students and college students for over a decade. But the pivotal moment in our recent life and why we're here today for Tikvah Online Academy is really a gift, a silver lining, if you will, of the pandemic. Because for over a decade, we were educating kids in person, residentially, face to face. And then with COVID, we needed to adapt to a radically different set of circumstances. So we took the leap, and many of us, if you know us, you know that we were skeptical initially of the ability of the vehicle of remote learning to be a true a form of exchange of ideas. But we gave it a whirl, and over 2,000 students later, or over 4,000 registrations later, in less than a year and a half, we now have grades 7 through 12 online education. We had initially, when we were doing things residentially and in person, we'd only done things for really upper grades in high school and college students. And with Zoom, we felt we could try with younger age, as early as young as middle-aged students. And the results have been very hopeful. We feel, given the great rate of return of our students, given the kind of feedback quantitatively and qualitatively that we've received, the kind of feedback that you've seen, Rabbi Wolpe, from your classes, something powerful is happening. And I think it's basically a function of our deep commitment to excellence in Jewish learning in 4 key areas that we think have been undervalued or not quite as focused upon in both the post bnei mitzvah world as well as the Jewish day school world. And that here are the 4 following areas, our core areas, if you will. Like Columbia University has a core curriculum, University of Chicago has, core, humanities courses. Well, our core 4 are courses and seminars in Jewish thought and theology. We believe, as you said, Rabbi Wolpe, the idea of Jewish philosophy is so critical in an era that the word literary mastery is a tougher thing. We got to excite students. We got to show them the level of sophistication, the level of intricacy, that this is a serious endeavor. This is not just Bible stories in kindergarten with cookies and milk. This is deep, profound, the great condition of humanity engaging with God and revelation. So Jewish thought, Jewish theology. The next area that we think needs more work in our world is Zionist history and the modern state of Israel. We got to get beyond talking points. We got to get beyond sloganeering. We got to get beyond sound bites. We need to engage in the history, in the thought, in the arguments, and that cannot be done in a kind of surface way through facts alone. It has to be inculcated through both an intellectually rigorous and historically credible approach that also gets kids to be emotionally attached and drawn. We don't believe in simply constructive, progressive education that says, let's look only critically at the ideas. We believe, yes, look at every argument, pro and con, critically, but also develop an affection, a love, a kind of way of exchanging the heart and not only the mind in your attachments intellectually and personally. The next great area is American civilization, American ideas and institutions. This great country is under assault in many ways, and we need to figure out how to talk about the narrative of America critically, but not in a way that deconstructs it and sees it only as a harbinger of evil or a harbinger of oppression. We need to see America in its glory and its best, and be realistic about its foibles and its weaknesses and its sins of the past. Obviously, every nation state is a complex entity, but there's so much that the Jew has to be thankful for. The Medina Shel Chesed, the great country of love and loving kindness. So that's America. So we teach American civics, American history, American civilization in a serious, critical, but deeply sympathetic way. And finally, the great books of the Western canon, great ideas, great debates, literature, culture, history. We want to create not only balanced or gentlemen or ladies. Those are wonderful things, but we want to produce leaders. And to produce leaders for the 21st century, they need to be literate. They need to be engaged with statesmanship, with strategy, with statecraft, with economics, with politics. They need to be people that understand the Jewish narrative and the Jewish story against the backdrop of all of humanity. I think those are the areas that are so central to our vision, and we try to do this better than anybody else. We don't know if we always succeed, but we certainly endeavor.
I want to say something about, first of all, that was a beautiful presentation. It's exactly right. And I'm really glad that you said that. And I think that I think you do it better than just about anybody, maybe than anybody. And the promotion of values, which is a part of all of this, is so important in a world in which, of course, whatever you think is right. And one other thing that I want to add, which illustrates that the last point you made. I taught ancient medieval Western Civ, and I used to teach it along with teaching rabbinical students, and the two, it had such a beautiful intersection, and Tikvah is all about that intersection. And I want to give one story, and then I'll be quiet about this, because someone said, what about Hebrew? And I'm so glad that you did. I think it was Daniel. Thank you for saying that. I should have said something about basic Hebrew language learning and so on and so forth. So junior year abroad, I went to Edinburgh because I was an English literature major. So I went to Scotland to study. And I
Nice.
wrote my father a long letter about how much I was loving Wordsworth. And he wrote back a letter that I wish I still had, but I remember what he said, even though I don't have the letter anymore, sadly. He said, I'm so glad that you are, that you love Wordsworth. My father loved poetry. He said, but remember that our people had our Wordsworth and Burns too. They were named Bialik and Chernyakhovsky and Yehuda Halevi. But he said, English poets became the poets of the world on the backs of British soldiers. And we didn't have an army to bring our poets to the world. And it's true. The reason Wordsworth became the poet of the Western world is because the British Empire conquered the Western world. Had the Jews conquered the Western world, everybody would quote Yehuda Halevi. So Jewish literature, especially in its native language, especially in Hebrew, is a tremendous treasure trove that is locked to our children if they don't open it.
Thank you. Rabbi Wolpe, stick around for the Q&A. We're going to have some
Happy to.
audio-visual fun here with my
Yes.
colleague, Reina.
Thank you, Rabbi Gottlieb, and thank you, Rabbi Wolpe. I just wanted to share with you all the Tikvah Online Academy website for this fall. It has not yet gone live, but this is our website for the programs that Rabbi Gottlieb and Rabbi Wolpe were just discussing. These are online 5-week seminars that meet once a week, 75 minutes in our middle school division for 7th and 8th graders,
Not up
90
yet,
minutes.
Reina.
Oh, sorry.
Now
okay.
it is.
It was up for a second. Okay.
Yes.
75 minutes for our 7th and 8th graders, 90 minutes for our 9th and 10th graders. These classes meet with master teachers, exactly the type of people that Rabbi Wolpe was describing, that can get your children excited about being Jewish and about Jewish ideas. Our faculty, they are college professors, public intellectuals, policy experts, rabbis, and other communal leaders. And our students
And
are
great
just
teachers.
yes,
Not only
great
not only great scholars, but great teachers, great pedagogues.
And they're lucky to be teaching some of the best students out there. Our students come from all over the world with a real intellectual hungering to learn more about Jewish ideas, to learn more about Jewish thought, to learn more about history and literature. Our students come from Brazil, Israel, Mexico, France, and of course the United States. And our classes this fall are a fantastic smattering of really the best of what we have to offer, from the profound influence of the Bible on the American story, to the ethics of social media, to the epic story of how the Israeli army came to be. Rabbi Gottlieb will be teaching a class on the philosophy of the Jewish holidays, not just what are the holidays, but really what are the profound importance and what can we deduce philosophically from the holidays. We'll have classes on Plato in the Bible. We'll have classes on the Cold War. We'll have classes on a fantastic variety of topics. And this will be sent to you in a link tomorrow. We hope that you will take a look, that your children will apply, that perhaps you'll share it with community members. But before then, I want to return to the topic of our conversation tonight. So I'm going to open the Q&A. If you haven't shared your question yet, we'll have about 10 minutes to go over these questions. And one question that I would really like to raise that I see here in the chat from Karen is that today we have kind of a consumer mentality when we are choosing not only what we wear, what we eat, but our children's educational offerings. How can we kind of address this consumerism with our educational programming? How can we create programming that's popular and that addresses children's interests and needs? And should we even do that, or should we be sticking to the book and saying this is what Jewish education is, and tough luck if that's not sexy enough?
Go ahead, David.
So look, we struggle with this in the synagogue too, because we're in a customer business. And if people don't want to be members of the synagogue folds. And so like any business that believes what you have is of great value, you have to be open and welcoming enough for people to experience it such that they will then want to be a part of it. And it's true, there has been a shift. There was a time when, of course, you were going to be a part of a community, a synagogue, a school, because you were Jewish. We don't live in that world anymore. And now, yes, we are in a business where we have to try to make it as attractive as possible without compromising what we believe in.
So a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
That's what it
Fantastic.
sounds like.
We have a few questions here about Israel advocacy and anti-Semitism. Are Hebrew schools, are Jewish day schools adequately preparing students to deal with this in the middle school level, at the high school level, and at the college level, and what can and should be done?
So I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I'm going to make it very brief. First of all, it takes an enormous amount of time and effort to really explain the story of the Middle East. And we're trying. I mean, all sorts of initiatives exist and organizations exist. Stand With Us does a really good job on college campuses. But it's hard because what you're facing is not a rational argument. I mean, there are some people who make rational arguments, who criticize Israel for this, that, and the other. But most of the time, it's just they've heard Israel is evil. It doesn't matter what you say. They know Israel is evil because they've heard it from all of their friends. So it's a very big cultural uphill battle. And I feel bad that our kids sometimes have to bear the burden of these arguments. I really do. They shouldn't have to. But we are trying. I mean, like every single educational effort, are we doing as much as we should? No, but we're doing a lot more than we were 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I would just add, it's implicit in what Rabbi Wolpe said, that the conversation has to go beyond the sound bites and slogans. And I think to do that, that takes real investment of time. It needs to be a real thoughtful, deliberate education. You know, we do, I think, a good job, but it needs to be done, you know, even more than any organization is doing. It needs to be inculcated in the family. I think your home, your parents need to be talking about these things so that it's not just a purely intellectual matter. It is intellectual, it is critical, but it's also something that is deeply affective, deeply enmeshed in your guts, in, you know, viscerally. I think that's, you know, it has to be pathos as much as logos.
Right.
We have a few questions here about really the issue of teen rebellion, that teenagers don't really want to do whatever their parents want them to do. How can this be addressed specifically in the realm of education?
I have an answer. I actually have an answer. It's in one word: bribery. I really mean it.
And you're serious. You're
I'm
not even
totally
joking.
serious. And
Yes,
I'll tell
I
you
can
why.
tell.
I'll tell you why. All of us work for money. Adults do that all the time, but somehow we think if you give kids money to do something, that's terrible. But I got news for you. If I had a kid that I wanted to go to Tikvah and they didn't want to go, I would say, I will give you this if you try it. Because I believe that if they do try it, it will incentivize them on its own. And so it could be money, it could be a gift, it could be something else. But I really do believe there is nothing wrong in all of our lives. We respond to incentives, and somehow we think it's immoral to do that with children. I don't think it is, right? You don't want to make their value system entirely about what they get. But if there's something really important that you know they won't go to otherwise, find a way to get them to go.
It's good.
I really believe
I
it.
see you don't want to bribe. You don't want to bribe your kids.
Oh, I'm not above bribing my child.
Okay, give it a different word. Incentivize.
Incentivize. That's
your
much
child.
smarter, much
Incentivize
slicker,
your child.
Rabbi.
Right, exactly.
A West Coast.
That's right. Our marketing team came up with
There
that
you
while
go.
I was talking. Right.
Another great question here. What role has Zoom played in the Jewish education? And maybe you could take a second to speak more broadly about what has the pandemic's impact been on the world of Jewish education, particularly supplemental education?
Wonderful and terrible. I mean, thank God we have these tools, because if this pandemic existed without them, it would have been extraordinarily difficult to make any kind of progress. And it also allowed us as a synagogue, for example, to reach people all over the world. People all over the world watch our services, watch our classes, watch our programs, which is great. Love that. Thursday night, I'm doing a program with Richie Torres through Sinai, who is a progressive Zionist, but like a real Zionist, a congressman from Brooklyn. And people all over are going to watch it and hear him, which is, I think, wonderful that they can hear him. But on the other hand, you know, panim el panim, face to face. There's nothing like it. Screens aren't people. So,
Rabbi, we have to talk on another occasion about coming back to Yale this summer. You know, the panim el panim.
panim el
That's what
panim,
just,
right,
prompted
exactly,
that comment.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, and I think as a final question, you know, there's a steep cost to Jewish education, whether that's in the day school world, even as supplemental education, synagogue membership. What is the most compelling case for making this investment, and why is this investment so steep?
I'll say two quick things. The first thing is the Jewish community collectively should be a little bit ashamed of itself that Jewish education is so expensive. We have tremendous wealth, and we could be supplementing much, much better than we do, so that parents aren't caught in this tremendous financial vise of spending tens of thousands of dollars for each kid to have Jewish education. Having said that, the best argument I can make is all the parents I have spoken to, and I cannot tell you how many in the 25 years that I've been the rabbi of the synagogue, I can't tell you how many parents have said the following to me: I wish I had sent my kid to a Jewish school. I've heard it so many times. And then it's too late. Then it's too late. Sending your child to a Jewish school gives them an orientation and a rootedness and a series of role models and friends that are irreplaceable. They're only going to have one middle high school experience. By day school, I mean both middle school and high school, by the way. They're only going to have one. You're not going to be able to repeat it. And if you don't do it now, then it's lost. Now, maybe they'll catch on fire later. But, you know, the Talmud talks about Girsa Diankuta, the version of your youth, that it's like writing on fresh paper. What you experience when you're 30 is not the same as what you experience when you're 11 or 15. So I would say the best reason to do it is so that later you don't say, God, why didn't I do that?
Well, that's a great place to conclude, at least for now, Rabbi Wolpe. David, thank you so much. This was a really great start at a deep question, and we're honored to say you were our inaugural speaker in our series of open house.
And you have some pretty awesome
We've got
people.
some great people coming up.
Awesome. Tell them who else is coming.
Yes, I'm going to.
It's a good lineup.
This Sunday, please join us for Christine Rosen, social critic and columnist for Commentary Magazine, as she'll be talking about the need to educate our students in free speech in a cancel culture environment that we live in today. That's, again, Sunday, August 29th at 7:30 p.m. On Thursday, the 2nd of September, we'll be joined by Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveitchik, who will be talking about how the high holidays can inform our understanding of American history, and American history can inform our understanding of the high holidays. And we'll be wrapping up with my friend and colleague, Dr. Rachel Fish, who will be talking about Israel education, in particular, that thorny topic of Israel advocacy. Is it enough, or are we doing enough? So please join us for these 3 riveting speakers and the programs ahead. Thank you again, Rabbi Wolpe.
Thank you. And to all of you who are listening, it just gets better. This is just.
No, oh, come on. Don't. Humility. It's Elul. You're being modest.
Hey,
But
great
really,
to
I want
see
to
you.
also
Thank you
thank.
so much. And thank you, Reina.
Thank
I
you,
really appreciate
Rabbi
it.
Wolpe. Thanks to Raina Weinstein. Thanks to the indefatigable director of the Tikvah Online Academy, my friend Irina Rachlis. Thanks to Simon Blechman supporting us on tech. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. Have a wonderful night. Shana Tova.
Take care. Shana Tova.